the 15th of June, 1945. The war in Europe was over yet for a group of Romanian women. The night still smelled of fear and uncertainty. A freight train screeched to a halt on a rain-slick siding in the American Midwest. The boxcar doors groaned open and a flood of light poured in, bleaching the gravel beneath their boots. Anna, just 22, clutched the strap of her satchel as if it might hold her past together. Beside her, Elena, barely 19, whispered a prayer in Romanian. They had been told by German officers that capture meant humiliation, starvation, even cruelty. Now every nerve braced for shouting, for snarling dogs, for fists. Instead, the first sound was the lazy snap of chewing gum. An American guard shifted his helmet, his rifle slung casually at his side, and without ceremony handed each woman a clean towel. The smell of soap clung to the fabric, so alien after months of grime. From the mess hall beyond the fence drifted aromas they could hardly comprehend: bacon, fat, coffee, warm bread. Somewhere faint but undeniable came the hiss of a bottle cap pried loose and the fizz of something sweet. Anna froze, her throat tightening. In the glare of the lamps she saw a wooden crate stenciled with bold letters Coca-Cola. A word she had only glimpsed once in a magazine, now glowing like a signal from another world. Confusion washed over her. This was not the America she had been warned about. The taste of fear lingered, but so did an unexpected question: if even here behind barbed wire mercy could arrive in the form of soap and the scent of sugar. What else about the world had been a lie? The journey into captivity began in Omes, the of Lyde, northern Italy, the 28th of April, 1945. The war had already collapsed around them like a house of glass. Anna, 22, had been a nursing student in Bucharest before being drafted as an auxiliary with a German medical column retreating through the Po Valley. Elena, her closest companion, had once been a seamstress. Now she carried bandages and lists of morphine vials for doctors who no longer had patients. Both women had marched westward, believing that surrendering to the Americans was safer than falling into Soviet hands. Still, their hearts pounded with dread. They had been told again and again that Americans treated prisoners like animals: humiliation, hunger, forced labor until death. That was the catechism drilled into every Axis auxiliary. When capture came, it was not the violence they feared. Outside Verona, the convoy stumbled into a roadblock of the U.S. Fifth Army. There were no beatings, no vengeful executions. A soldier in dusty khaki simply raised a hand and ordered them down from their truck. Papers were collected, satchels searched. Anna remembered how her fingers shook as she offered the Red Cross patch sewn to her sleeve, expecting mockery. Instead, the American officer merely nodded, made a note on his clipboard, and waved her toward a holding cage of barbed wire near Modena. The cage smelled of dust, sweat, and wood smoke, but it was organized. Guards patrolled with indifference, not cruelty. Even that indifference felt like a luxury. The next days passed in a blur of paperwork. Their names, nationalities, occupations were recorded on index cards stamped PW. Each prisoner was tagged with a number. Interrogations were brief, almost perfunctory. They were asked about German units' medical supplies, whether they had seen signs of organized resistance. No one asked them to confess ideology. No one slapped their faces for hesitation. It was the bureaucracy of empire, not the fury of conquest, and that alone shocked Anna more than threats would have. From Modena they were loaded into trucks and driven south toward Naples. Along the route, Anna caught glimpses of bombed bridges, but also of Italian villagers working in fields, children waving timidly. The war had left scars, but life moved stubbornly forward. When the trucks rolled into the port, she stopped breathing. In the harbour lay Liberty ships, grey giants lined up like warehouses afloat. She had never seen such steel. Cargo nets swayed overhead, unloading sacks of flour and crates stenciled with American markings. On the dock sat another pile of crates with a name painted in bold white Coca-Cola. The sight lodged like a splinter in her mind. The prisoners were marched up gangplanks and down into cavernous holds converted into dormitories. Steel bunks were stacked 3 high each with a thin mattress and 2 blankets. The Atlantic crossing was a torment of seasickness, the groaning of steel and the slap of dishes in the mess line. Yet even here, another dissonance appeared. The food was heavy and bland, but plentiful stew, thick with potatoes, slices of soft white bread, pads of butter wrapped in foil. Anna could not remember the last time she had seen butter. Elena gagged at the unfamiliar taste, then giggled through her nausea, half-crazed with the absurdity of vomiting over abundance instead of scarcity. An army nurse, her hair pinned under a white cap, walked through their rows with a stethoscope listening to lungs, checking pulses. A quick spray of delousing powder left Anna smelling of chalk and citrus. She wondered why an enemy would bother to keep them clean. The guard who distributed soap called out in Italian-accented English, "Don't eat it." And the joke made other women laugh despite themselves. After 2 weeks, the skyline of America rose over the water. Hampton roads, cranes, warehouses, an expanse of factories spewing smoke not from bombs but from industry. From the train windows that carried them inland, Anna saw rivers shining like polished steel silos, rising like towers, neon cups glowing outside roadside diners. She pressed her forehead to the glass. This was a land untouched by rubble. While Bucharest lay in ruins, while Cluj starved here, the lights still burned. The journey stretched for days through farmland. Grain elevators towered like fortresses of food. The prisoners whispered about what it meant. If they can feed their land this much, Elena murmured, what can their soldiers eat at the front? At one rural station, a troop of American Girl Scouts waved as the POW train slowed. One girl pressed her palm to the window. Elena lifted her hand in response before jerking it down, ashamed of the reflex. Finally, the gates of the camp appeared. Guard towers stood tall barbed wire coiled in gleaming rows. But the ground had been raked smooth, the signs painted in neat letters in multiple languages. There was even a small chapel tent pitched near the perimeter, its cross visible in the distance. Anna braced for dogs, and shouting, yet none came. Intake began with a line before a low wooden barrack. A plume of steam from the laundry drifted over them, carrying the sharp tang of lemon soap. Quartermasters handed out laundered dungarees stenciled with PW shoes that fit, and 2 clean wool blankets. Anna held them to her face, inhaling. She felt dizzy from the scent of cleanliness, as if this were a luxury too extravagant for prisoners. A chaplain with spectacles nodded politely, and asked if anyone required religious accommodation. A mess sergeant ink smudged on his fingers, marked notes on his clipboard. No pork, vegetarian. Special diet. Anna blinked in disbelief. No one had asked her preferences since childhood. The question seemed obscene in its gentleness, and then came the detail she would never forget. As they queued for a medical recheck, a soldier opened a wooden cooler packed with ice. Bottles glistened inside amber and green, frosted with condensation. He popped the cap off one with a church key. The hiss and fizz filled the air. A sweet, spicy scent of citrus and caramel drifted toward Anna. She turned her face away, convinced this was the trap she had always been warned about: temptation, humiliation, a trick to break them. Yet the guard drank casually, wiping his mouth on his sleeve, uninterested in whether she watched or not. The sound haunted her for days, the hiss of a cap, the fizz of bubbles. It was the sound of another world pressing through the cracks of everything she had been taught. The camp became its own small, paradoxical universe. After the first shock of arrival, faded routine settled in like the hum of an engine, steady, relentless, and strangely comforting. For Anna and Elena, it was the first time in years that each day unfolded according to rules that did not change overnight. War had made everything unpredictable. Bomb sirens at midnight, rations cut without warning, orders shouted in languages half understood. Now inside the barbed wire of an American POW camp in the Midwest, time was measured not by fear but by the bugle of reveille, the clang of the mess hall bell, and the call of guards making their morning rounds. The barracks were long wooden huts, airy, with windows that were opened each morning by order. Each woman was assigned a bunk and a footlocker. On the first night, Anna ran her fingers over the clean sheets, marveling at their faint scent of starch. She had expected straw lice and damp. Instead, there was order: a potbelly stove for the winter months, a chart pinned to the wall, listing rotations for sweeping latrine duty and stove tending. Elena laughed, bitterly whispering, "We are prisoners in a house cleaner than my apartment back in Bucharest." It was meant as a joke, but the truth stung. Roll call came at dawn. Guards stood with clipboards, ticking off names, the cadence of English syllables, clipped and official. The women lined up, some stiff with defiance, others simply exhausted. Inspections followed, sometimes checking nails, sometimes ensuring hair was braided neatly, sometimes issuing soap or fresh towels. None of it resembled the brutality they had feared. The Americans were methodical but not malicious. Then came the mess hall. It was here that the contradictions hit hardest. The building itself was utilitarian long wooden tables, metal trays stacked by the entrance steam rising from vats of food. Yet to the women it was overwhelming. Stainless ladles clinked against trays as cooks served oatmeal speckled with raisins, eggs on Sundays, thick slices of white bread that seemed impossibly soft, and always coffee, dark, bitter, bottomless. On one wall hung a poster listing the rations guaranteed by the Geneva Convention. Anna read it twice, unable to believe that international law dictated she should eat better as a prisoner than she had in the months before capture. What shocked her most was predictability. 3 meals a day, every day, without fail. No begging, no bribing, no trading scraps with soldiers. The rhythm of meals was as steady as the ticking of a clock. Outside the camp, letters from home described hunger coal shortages, endless lines for bread. Inside trays were filled, emptied, washed and filled again. The contrast gnawed at Anna's conscience. Work details filled the hours between meals. Some women were assigned to sew and mend uniforms in a barrack workshop. Others volunteered for agricultural details on nearby farms, enticed by the promise of fresh air and small payments in camp scrip. Anna often worked in the sewing hut, her hands stitching seams with needles sharper and stronger than any she had used back home. Elena once joined a farm detail and returned wide-eyed telling of barns stacked with hay fields that rolled out in green waves and American farmers who spoke gently even to their animals. In the afternoons there were classes. A makeshift library offered English primers, magazines, and even a Romanian language Bible donated by some local congregation. Anna signed up for language lessons out of curiosity. The teacher, a fellow prisoner from Poland who had studied in London, drilled them in simple phrases. "How are you? Thank you. Good morning." Each word felt strange, as if it carried not just meaning but the weight of a different world. Music came in the evenings. A hand-cranked gramophone spun records of swing and big band. The notes filled the air, alien yet irresistible, and some women swayed gently embarrassed by their own longing. One American guard once showed them a photograph of his Cleveland neighborhood wooden houses with porches, children playing in the street. His name, he explained, came from grandparents in the Banat, a place Anna knew only vaguely. For a moment the world shrank to the size of a photograph bridging continents with a single family's migration. But always, the contrast with home remained. Letters arrived sporadically. Anna's aunt wrote of Bucharest streets lined with rubble of ration lines stretching around corners of neighbours who boiled nettles to fill their stomachs. Each word from home was a knife. Inside the wire there was order, cleanliness, food. Outside there was collapse. Guilt seeped into every corner of Anna's mind. At night she hoarded crusts of bread in her footlocker as if waiting for the abundance to vanish. Old instincts clung to her in war. Tomorrow's meal was never promised. Elena teased her, but the teasing was gentle. One night Elena laughed freely. A sound like a bell then covered her mouth in horror, as though joy itself were forbidden. And yet the fence defined their existence. Beyond the wire stretched America barns, fields, roads, humming with trucks. Within the wire lay order, safety, and a strange dignity. The paradox was unbearable. They were captives, but captives fed and clothed. They were supposed to be hated enemies, yet guards nodded, politely handed out soap, and even asked if anyone needed a doctor. Anna often wondered if it was all theatre. Was there a darker stage waiting behind the curtain? Would mercy one day peel away, revealing cruelty beneath? The memory of the cooler packed with bottles haunted her. She could still hear the hiss of carbonation, smell the sweet sting in the air. She had turned away, but the image lingered, a crate of impossible luxuries, guarded not by malice but by indifference. Every night before sleep, as the lights dimmed and the barrack filled with whispers, Anna found herself replaying that moment. She could not understand why it rattled her more than barbed wire or rifles. A towel, a bed, even soap could be explained by pragmatism. But why would an enemy have something so frivolous, so joyful, as bottles of sugar water? The question gnawed at her in silence, The camp was safe-ordered, humane, but it was also a mirror forcing the women to confront the lies they had been told. Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady breathing of her companions. Somewhere outside, a guard opened another bottle, and the faint fizz cut through the night air. Inside her chest, fear and curiosity warred. Which would win, she did not yet know. The 4th of July, 1945. The date meant little to Anna and Elena when they first heard it mentioned by the guards. To them it was just another summer day behind barbed wire. Yet the camp seemed to change its rhythm that morning. Flags appeared on poles. A radio outside the guard hut crackled with triumphant voices. Somewhere beyond the fence, gunfire popped, not in battle but in celebration, rifles discharging blanks into the sky. Rumors traveled quickly there would be a feast, and even the prisoners would taste something new. By noon the compound buzzed. The women lined up in the mess hall, trays in hand. The Americans had decided to extend the abundance of their holiday into the POW quarters, partly as policy, partly as a gesture. For the guards, it was routine. For the prisoners, it was incomprehensible. Anna had heard whispers, chocolate soda, words so absurd they sounded like jokes. She braced herself for disappointment. Surely this was another rumor like so many others. Then came the moment. Into her hand fell a cold glass bottle. The surface was slick, with condensation beads of water racing down like silver threads. A church key pried the crown cap loose with a hiss. The fizz sang in the air, bright, stinging, alive. In the same instant, a foil-wrapped chocolate bar landed on her tray with a gentle metallic crackle. Anna stared. The letters on the wrapper gleamed like something from a fairy tale. She hesitated. Her mind screamed warnings. It is a trick, a test, a humiliation. For years, propaganda had told her Americans would weaponize cruelty. And yet here was the opposite, sweetness offered without condition. She raised the bottle to her lips. The first sip exploded across her senses. Sweetness so sharp it burned. Bubbles danced across her tongue, shot into her nose, made her eyes water. She coughed and laughed at once, startled by her own body. It was like drinking light itself, like swallowing a spark of summer. Elena beside her gripped her arm in shock. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Then Anna broke the chocolate bar. The snap was clean, decisive, a sound of abundance. The smell rose instantly, milk, cocoa sugar. She closed her eyes and was thrown back to a Bucharest Christmas years before, when her mother had saved coins for a single kozarnak, studded with walnuts and dusted with sugar. That taste of safety and warmth bloomed in her mouth now in the middle of captivity. Her throat tightened. Was delight betrayal? Was surrendering to sweetness a kind of treason? She thought of her aunt's letters of neighbours, starving of children, chewing nettles to survive. To taste this was to know what was possible, and to know it while her homeland starved was unbearable. She swallowed anyway, and with the swallow came tears. Around her other women reacted in their own ways. Some devoured the bar, instantly desperate. Some nibbled cautiously, eyes darting as if someone would snatch it away. A few froze, unable to eat at all, staring at the foil in disbelief. The room filled with the sound of bottles, clinking caps, popping laughter, erupting in bursts that seemed almost forbidden. One guard demonstrated a trick. He dropped peanuts into his cola, and the bubbles carried them up and down like buoys. The prisoners gasped, then giggled the sound, childlike, unguarded. Another guard pulled a small tin from his pocket, cookies his sister had baked and mailed from home. He passed them to the women without fanfare. The fence around them seemed for that afternoon less like a cage, and more like a railing on a bridge connecting two worlds. Anna sat with the chocolate, half melted in her palm, the cola fizzing beside her. She thought of what she had been told, that Americans would spit on her, starve her, break her. Instead, they had given her a bottle of sweetness and a bar of sugar. It felt more dangerous than cruelty. Cruelty she could resist. Mercy disarmed her. In the days that followed, the memory of that taste grew sharper, not duller. She replayed the moment at night, the first sip, the sting of bubbles, the scent of cocoa. It had become more than food. It was a key. It unlocked memories of childhood, of safety, of laughter, before the world had fallen apart. It also unlocked questions she was not ready to face. If the Americans were capable of this, of kindness, of abundance, of frivolous joy, then what else had been a lie? Every meal afterward seemed changed. Bread was no longer just bread, but a reminder that there could always be more. Coffee was no longer bitter necessity, but a sign of inexhaustible supply. Even the plainest apple carried the shadow of chocolate. Anna wrote in her journal a small notebook she had bartered from another prisoner. On one page, she listed lies I was told. On the next, things I tasted. Under the second heading, she wrote Coca-Cola chocolate mercy. The paradox consumed her. She wanted to resist, to dismiss it as manipulation. Yet nothing about the gesture had been forced. No one demanded loyalty in exchange for sweetness. No one demanded thanks. It was simply given. And that, she realized, was what made it unbearable. Mercy offered freely was a weapon sharper than any whip. The 4th of July passed into memory, but its taste lingered. Months later, when the women queued for ordinary rations, oatmeal, potatoes, bread, Anna would sometimes imagine the fizz against her tongue, the chocolate sweetness melting across her mouth. And she would wonder each time, why had this more than guns or bombs shaken her faith in what she had been told? In the end, the chocolate bar and the bottle were more than food. They were symbols, proof that the world was larger, kinder, more complex than she had ever dared imagine. And once tasted, that truth could not be untasted. The weeks after the 4th of July felt different, though nothing visible had changed in the camp. The same fences stood, the same towers, watched the same schedules, ordered the prisoners' days. Yet inside Anna something had shifted. The fizz of that bottle, the sweetness of that chocolate bar had lodged in her like a splinter she could not ignore. It was not only a taste, but a revelation the enemy had given her joy. And joy was far more corrosive to old certainties than any whip could ever be. Every morning she still woke to the bugle's call, but instead of dread she felt a strange anticipation. The camp had become a classroom, a testing ground for everything she thought she knew. The English lessons were the first crack in the wall. She had joined them out of curiosity, half as a joke. But the act of writing new words in her notebook, liberty, dignity, mercy, was intoxicating. Each word carried not just meaning but possibility. To repeat them aloud was to taste something forbidden, something that might one day belong to her. Elena joined too, and soon the two Romanian girls practiced together, after lights-out whispering phrases under their blankets. "How are you? I am fine." The words were childish, but they carried weight. They were the vocabulary of another world, a world not built on slogans and suspicion. Sometimes Anna would laugh at the awkwardness of her accent, and Elena would cover her mouth quickly, still afraid of being punished for joy. Yet no punishment came. Laughter was allowed. That alone seemed like rebellion against everything they had been told. The camp newspaper offered another crack. Translated clippings from American and neutral sources told of the war's battles of cities rebuilt of people liberated. One article described the Ploiești oil fields, the very lifeblood of Romania's contribution to the Axis, now bombed into submission. Maps showed the raids in detail, photographs displayed smoking refineries. Anna felt a sick twist in her stomach as she realized how much had been hidden from her. The Germans had told them the fields still flowed, that the enemy was powerless. Yet here in black and white was proof of devastation. Newsreels followed. Once a week, the guards invited prisoners into a tent where a projector rattled images onto a canvas sheet. They showed parades in New York, factories churning out tanks, women welding in shipyards. Then, more shocking, they showed liberated concentration camps. Anna stared at skeletal figures wrapped in blankets, hollow-eyed children clutching biscuits. The voiceover explained calmly, without hysteria, what had been uncovered. She wanted to look away, but she could not. These were not inventions. They were filmed facts, undeniable. The lies began to crumble in her head. If America was the monster she had been told, why did their guards distribute soap and clean clothes? If their factories were weak, how could they fill ships with food and soda? If Germany had been noble, why had it hidden horrors like this? At night, Anna filled pages of her notebook. On one side she wrote, "What I was told." On the other, "What I see." Under the first she listed, "Americans are cruel. Americans starve their prisoners. America is collapsing." Under the second she listed, "Clean barracks, 3 meals a day. Chocolate cola. Factories without end. She drew a line between the columns and stared until her eyes blurred. Conversations with guards deepened the confusion. One evening, a young sentry lingered near the sewing hut and showed Aina a photograph of his grandparents in the Banat. The words he spoke sounded almost like her dialect. He taught her a slangy phrase, "How's it going?" and she answered in Romanian "Sefaci." They laughed at the echo. The enemy, it seemed, was not faceless. He was a boy with family roots not so different from hers. Even small details became corrosive. In the sewing hut she was given gloves that fit perfectly, needles that did not break fabric of a quality she had not touched in years. "Why do they give us the best tools?" Elena asked. "We are only prisoners." The question lingered. Why indeed Anna found herself unlearning habits. She stopped hiding bread in her footlocker. She began to eat slowly without fear that tomorrow the meal would vanish. One day she bit into an apple, chewed deliberately, and let herself enjoy it. She realized it was the first time in years she had eaten without guilt. Yet guilt still crept in other forms. Letters from home spoke of hunger, of shortages, of neighbors dying in cold apartments. How could she reconcile her abundance with their suffering? To enjoy a chocolate bar here was to betray them, she thought. And yet she could not forget the taste. One evening, Anna volunteered to translate for a newly arrived Polish girl who spoke neither German nor English. She surprised herself with how quickly she bridged the gap, piecing together fragments of language. The girl smiled, grateful. Anna felt a warmth she had not felt since before the war, the warmth of being useful not as a cog in ideology, but as a human being helping another human being. The ideological collapse was not sudden. It was a slow erosion like water carving stone. But each drop, each word, each image, each taste wore away what she had been taught. She remembered the slogans painted on walls back home. "Sacrifice for the Axis victory will come." Here victory had already come, and it wore the face of abundance. One night, as she lay awake, the fizz of cola still vivid in her memory, she realized the truth. If the loudest sound of war had been explosions, the second loudest was that gentle hiss of a bottle opened without fear. That sound had undone her more than any defeat on the battlefield. If this was a lie, she thought, what else had been a lie? And if it was not a lie, if mercy could truly exist even in war, then perhaps the entire foundation of her beliefs had been built on sand. The camp around her was still a prison, but her mind was no longer captive. The collapse of ideology was not just a loss. It was also a beginning. The notice came pinned to the bulletin board outside the barracks in early 1946, repatriation orders. Anna read the English words, carefully translating each syllable, her stomach tightening. The war was over, but the journey home was about to begin. She and Elena were summoned to turn in their PW uniforms, the stenciled dungarees and serviceable shoes they had worn for months. In their place, the camp seamstress offered stitched dresses, plain but clean, with hems that fell modestly below the knee. The prisoners were issued parcels wrapped in brown paper, a bar of soap, a wool blanket, a packet of powdered milk, even a small chocolate bar folded into the corner, as if it were an afterthought. Anna tucked hers into the pocket of her satchel with trembling fingers. The voyage back across the Atlantic felt very different from the one that had carried them west. The Liberty ship groaned with the weight of hundreds of prisoners, but the air was thick with anticipation rather than dread. Still, the ship smelled of rope salt and old coffee, familiar scents of transit. Anna stood at the rail at night, watching the foam unfurl behind them, and wondered what kind of Romania awaited her. She thought of the fizz of Coca-Cola, of the chocolate melting on her tongue, and tried to imagine ever tasting such things again. The memories seemed almost like dreams, as if America had been a mirage rising from the sea. When the ship docked in Europe, the landscape that greeted them was a ruin. The port lay broken warehouses, pocked with shell holes, cranes twisted into skeletal forms. The train that carried them east rattled through cities, half-collapsed bridges rebuilt in wood villages, scarred with blackened chimneys standing where houses had been. Each station felt colder, hungrier, emptier. By the time the train hissed into Bucharest, Anna felt the weight of returning heavier than captivity had ever been. Her city was hardly recognizable. Streets where she had walked as a student were lined with ruins. Facades still blistered from the Allied bombings of 1000, 944, leaned precariously. Tramlines' sagged windows were boarded and queues of silent people wrapped around corners for bread. Her father was gone lost during the conscription drives of 1944. An aunt survived but looked decades older, her frame brittle, her hair grey and thin. Neighbours whispered when they saw Anna return in her foreign dress, her satchel clutched tightly. "American's girl," one muttered. Another stared at her shoes. Shoes in good repair, unlike the rags most civilians wore, and raised an eyebrow. She felt heat crawl up her neck. Had captivity marked her forever? To some, she was no longer Romanian but tainted a collaborator by survival. The ration card she received at the municipal office felt like a leash. The official behind the desk asked questions that sounded less like welcome and more like interrogation. Where had she been held? What had she eaten? Had she worked for the Americans? Each answer was scribbled in a ledger, with ink that seemed to accuse. Anna realized that the mercy she had known inside the barbed wire might become a secret she could never speak aloud. At night, in her aunt's crumbling apartment, she unwrapped the chocolate bar she had carried all the way from America. It had bent and softened, but the scent still bloomed the moment the foil opened. She broke one square into a cup, mixed it with hot water, and the last pinch of sugar her aunt had hidden and stirred until it melted. The two women shared the thin brown liquid in silence. Her aunt wept softly, holding the cup as if it were a chalice. For Anna, the taste was both salvation and torment. It reminded her of mercy, but also of everything her homeland could not yet provide. Years unfolded with the same rhythm of scarcity. Anna worked in a clinic binding wounds and measuring medicine that never seemed enough. She married borrowing shoes for the ceremony and raised a child who coughed through winters because coal was rare. She whispered no stories of the camp, keeping them folded inside like a hidden letter. To admit that captivity had given her food and dignity while her people starved was to invite suspicion, even punishment. And yet she kept fragments of the experience alive in private rituals. She washed her hands carefully, recalling the American handbook's lessons on hygiene. She measured doses, precisely trusting the science she had once doubted. And sometimes, when she found an apple in the market, she ate it slowly, letting herself savor it as she had learned to do inside the camp. One memory refused to fade: July 4th, the day of fizz and sweetness. She had never again tasted cola, never again broken American chocolate across her teeth. But she remembered the laughter in the mess hall, the way prisoners and guards alike had smiled at the peanuts bobbing in the soda. It was absurd, but it had been real. That laughter had been the moment when the war seemed to pause, when humanity reached across a fence. Decades later, Anna wrote a letter she never mailed. She addressed it to Elena, though she did not know if her friend had survived. In it, she described the bottle, the bar, the laugh they had shared. She described the paradox of a fence that sometimes felt like a railing on a bridge, a boundary that divided and connected at once. She folded the letter and pressed it into the pages of the nursing handbook she had kept from the camp. The words there, wash, boil, measure, be kind, remained true, no matter the flag that flew above her. The war had taken her youth, her city, her family. But in the strangest twist, captivity had given her something she could not discard: the memory of mercy. It was a burden because it clashed with the narrative of betrayal and suffering everyone around her lived by. But it was also a secret salvation, proof that humanity could survive even in the darkest times, and so she carried it silently like a hidden ember. A bottle fizzing in memory, a square of chocolate melting on her tongue, a moment of kindness that could never be erased. In the end, the story of Anna and the other Romanian women was not about chains or guards or fences. It was about a taste, two tastes in fact, that refused to fade: the fizz of Coca-Cola and the sweetness of chocolate. They had braced for whips and curses, for hunger and humiliation. Instead, they found towels pressed into their hands, soap placed in their lockers, bread set on their trays. The greatest shock was not cruelty, but kindness. Food became the language of mercy. A bottle cap hissing open carried more power than a rifle fired in anger. A square of chocolate broken in half became proof that enemies could choose compassion over contempt. For women raised on the iron certainty of propaganda, such gestures were dangerous. Cruelty could be resisted. Mercy, freely offered, left no defense. It worked its way into memory, into conscience, until the lies cracked under the weight of sweetness. Years later, when cities were rebuilt and ration lines finally shortened, Anna still remembered that moment behind barbed wire. She understood the irony. She had gone to war, believing America was monstrous, yet the most enduring memory she carried home was the taste of an American holiday. A simple act of sharing had rewritten her idea of the possible, and so the question lingered, echoing beyond her lifetime: if mercy could exist even in the heart of war, what else had been possible all along?